Hi, I'm Gaia.
I'm Angelica.
Today we're speaking to João, CEO of Portuguese real estate company Vendo. Hi, João.
Hi.
Thank you very much for coming today. So please tell us about Vendo.
Vendo is a seller support service, real estate intermediation company, but we really focus on the seller support service without an agent. We charge 1% commission.
You're going to have to tell me what a seller support agent is.
Yeah. So instead of regular agencies, at least in Portugal, our model is really revolving around 5% commissions with agencies and kind of like this pyramid structure where you have the franchise holder, the company or the office, the sales manager or sales director, sales manager, and then brokers. Here we are just going direct to sellers, and basically we support them in their process of selling their house by themselves.
And how do you find these sellers?
Right now, the sellers come to us through our marketing channels, and at the same time, we also do sales calls. I guess I can explain that there's this platform where you can identify sell-by owners, owners who are selling their house directly, and then we pitch our services to them. Usually it's a good match because they want to sell their house without an agent, and we do a lot of the things that the agents do without having an agency and for a fifth of the cost.
I think we should speak about sales for 1 second. So for the audience, we were having a discussion before this podcast started, and we were talking about corporate versus startup. Tell us about your initial days of sales.
When we first started, we rented a small warehouse, a room in a warehouse, and it had no AC.
A room in a warehouse.
Yeah, it was a little room in a warehouse. The warehouse belonged to a company, a friend of ours, his business. We set up some computers and started establishing a little workspace there. We didn't have AC, and so it was some interesting summer vibes. Portugal can get quite hot, and in that warehouse room, it would get to like 35 degrees Celsius. So we'd find ourselves in a very interesting environment where at the time it was 3 of us. We had a fan on top of the table, and our shirts were off, and we were just making sales calls through
grinding.
that platform. Yeah.
That is so funny. That is the most startup thing I've ever heard. I don't know about you, but...
We would have beers in the office, and it's like being in the beach. Yes.
So European.
Yeah,
I
I
think
have to say it is. It is, yeah.
Portugal will be very different than the UK, I feel like, in many cultural aspects with regards to
Startups
business.
in the UK, I would say. I mean, that's just the startup vibe in general, because we've had, towards the beginning of the podcast, lots of young startup founders, and you can just, by the way that they speak about their culture, the way that they speak about their product, the attitude is just so vastly different to, say, more seasoned founders that started their companies like 10, 20 years ago and have, a different working structure. It's just like the startup, dynamic.
Yeah.
And that's probably essential to the way that you operate as a business, because you need to be able to, pivot and change strategy.
And also be very close with your co-workers, no? Because I feel from what we've said, from the people we've spoken to with this podcast, like your initial team is so important and so crucial to the development of your business.
Absolutely. I mean, our starting team, we're all friends, and we know each other for many years. And actually, all of us are kind of good at certain areas. One of the co-founders, he worked with me at Sotheby's in real estate before we set up.
I used to work at Sotheby's Real Estate in New York. Yeah.
Well, I was working at Sotheby's in Lisbon, in Cascais.
So interesting.
Interesting.
How many years in corporate did you do before you started this?
3 years.
3 years. Okay, so not that long.
Not very long, yeah. Before that, I had a completely different life. I was doing some other things. I'm a pilot as well.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
So interesting.
Yeah, but then real estate, great timing for Portugal. The real estate market in Portugal, I think maybe in the last 10 years, it's more than doubled. It's and in the last 5 years specifically, especially post-COVID, we've had tremendous increase both in foreign capital coming in, as well as many strange dynamics internally in Portugal that have exploded the real estate market.
What do you think the external factors are for this, and then the internal factors?
The external factors, well, on the one hand, there are many geopolitical considerations that have made it so foreign capital coming to Portugal makes a lot more sense. A lot of people want to have a house in a nice place, and especially post-COVID, there's no need for people to be in London anymore, oftentimes, and they
With
can
remote
just
working,
with remote work or London.
Coming a crisis here.
Yeah, London, Germany, the United States. I think a lot of American buyers were thinking about coming to Portugal, and they've been buying property there. But that's small. That's obviously affected a lot the higher end market. And then internally, we have a huge supply shortage. We've been the country that has built the least houses per capita in the EU for like the last 20 years.
Why do you think that is?
The reason why is because of government regulations.
Yeah.
There's several layers to it, including municipal regulations for building. We're a very bureaucratic state, extremely bureaucratic state, and kind of our business, Vendo, is trying to be the antithesis of that. We're really just, we're extremely averse to bureaucracy. We're very pragmatic, very direct.
Do you see yourself eventually getting to a point where you build houses?
I don't think so. That would be kind of ambitious. I think that we would like to go to a place in which eventually we might have some type of credit agency of sorts where we can provide credit for clients looking to buy properties, but to actually build houses, it might be a little bit difficult. Although it's kind of interesting.
How did your experience at Sotheby's shape your career now?
It shaped it a lot because Sotheby's is kind of the exact opposite of what we're doing at Vendo. So at Sotheby's, lots of regulations, lots of bureaucracy. I do think it's quite different at Sotheby's in Portugal than it is in other places, really. There is a very bureaucratic mindset in Lisbon.
What does this mindset look like?
Looks like prioritizing the company's interests rather than prioritizing the client, having to go through many hoops to protect yourself. So there's this fear mindset that develops in these agencies, and Sotheby's is not really the only one. In Portugal, it's kind of like that. They just create attrition to the sales process. They create attrition to the sales teams, and they really, their focus is on themselves rather than on the client.
When you say fear, what are some practical examples of things that could go wrong, and how do they try to protect themselves?
So a common example is that in Portugal, you have reservation, promissory contract, and then public deed. This is how you sell a property. One of the ways that they like to get paid, the commission, is to, as soon as there's a promissory contract signed, you pay the entire commission. For instance, if you have a promissory contract where the deposit is above 10%, they would like to receive the totality of the commission in the promissory contract, whereas the deal is only concluded in the public deed, which happens months later, potentially. The public deed in Portugal is when the Land Registry transfers from one owner to another owner. So
it's like the final step. Yeah.
Exactly. There's first a reservation agreement. People come to terms on whatever their terms are, and then they usually 2-3 weeks later they sign a promissory contract. This is a binding contract where you pass on 10%, 20% of the property value that you've agreed to, and it's a contract that will then kind of be replicated in the contract of the public deed, and this is when the transfer really happens and is consummated. The public deed is a land registry office. It's a very French or European continental system. I don't know if it's the same here in the UK or certainly not in the United States. That's why you have things like title insurance in I guess, American and British culture countries, whereas in Portugal, there's no point for title insurance because there's a national land registry that kind of guarantees the property transactions. It's impossible to kind of...
It's so interesting, property, because I feel like all these regulations and laws, modern laws, they're so historical. Like these go back... These are formed over centuries, kind of. Like, especially here in the UK, like the different boroughs are owned by literally individuals, which 300 years ago won a war or whatever. And so the king was like, take that bit of land and rent it out to, everyone else for the rest of time. And like, that's what, that's how the structure is today. Is it similar in Portugal?
Yeah, I mean, these are all concepts from our legal system that come for hundreds of years, even thousands. A lot of our legal system is Roman and Germanic legal system. So I would say that they're at least hundreds of years. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So when you work with lawyers to finalize the process, do you ever work with in-house lawyers, or often does it happen that the buyer wants to suggest a lawyer that they know and that they trust?
And technically in Portugal, we're not allowed to have in-house lawyers in a real estate company. There's a regulator doesn't allow you to have an in-house lawyer. We can have jurists to support, but they would need to be external. And then there are also many anti-competitive, again, part of the bureaucratic system in Portugal that impede people from producing any type of legal work that if you're not regulated as a lawyer.
I think it would be interesting to speak about your team structure and how you found these people, bar them from, because I assume they're not all just your friends.
No, they're not. I mean, these 4 people are the ones who started. They were friends of ours, and then the rest, essentially, they kind of came to us. And that's what we've noticed, that where we have the closest match. These are people who they've either seen our stories or our content, and they reach out to us. They notice that we're hiring because we post regular, or we were posting regular hiring updates. And Alexandra, João Ferreira, these are some kind of two people that have been very strong working with us. They came to us. And when we go out and try and recruit people directly, it's been a bit harder. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But the great fits, usually they see us and they see something that matches, and then it works well.
What matches?
I think that usually, for instance, with Alexandra, I think she really appreciated the energy and the vibe and the vision where we were headed to. And with João Ferreira, the same thing. I think João Ferreira used to work at an agency as well. He worked at Remax. Remax is kind of one of the biggest ones in Portugal, as it is everywhere else. And he was just a bit disillusioned with the way that they were working. Really, there are we could get quite deep into some of these things. I think saying things like they're very bureaucratic is nice enough for now, but there are many things that are happening in some of these agencies. They've kind of stagnated since the 90s. And so the processes, the sales strategies, they're very 90s-esque. They want you to do door-to-door sales. They want you to kind of shove down the client whatever needs to be done to get the sale. And so he really didn't like that at all. He saw that we were not operating like that at all. We were thinking we have a good service, and if you want it, we have it for you, and that's it. If you don't want it, totally fine. And I think he appreciated kind of this mindset, this laissez-faire, very liberal mindset that we have at Vendo, and so they come to us.
What does your typical consumer look like? So do you serve a big chunk of the market, or do you focus specifically on a specific persona?
Yeah, that's interesting because in the beginning, I think we were much more higher end focused because of my experience and so I also had a network and bringing that in. Nowadays, we're definitely much more in the medium to lower segment, so properties around 300 to 600,000 euros in Portugal. That, believe it or not, that for a relatively not super wealthy country, that's to say that is kind of a middle low class property is something.
Yeah, the prices have skyrocketed.
Skyrocketed completely. I think the average property in Portugal is about 350,000 now.
350,000. What was it 5 years ago?
Maybe 200. Yeah.
But that's a problem, isn't it? For then there must be lots of tension. This is obviously relating to legislation, but between people who were born and raised there and have lived there for years, and all of these incoming tourists and people who are buying these properties. Do you feel like there are going to be new legislations that try to prevent that and try to cap these prices?
There have been several regulations put in place to try and avoid that, but the reality is that foreign capital, it's really kind of disrupting mainly higher-end properties. International clients are coming, they're usually cash buyers, and they're coming and they're buying properties at a different segment, and so they're not really influencing too much, and it's also a very small minority of transactions. I think we're talking about 1%.
That's interesting. So the high-end buyers, I assume they will typically buy in a similar place and in a similar region.
Less so now, but in the beginning, yes, there are neighborhoods, areas in Lisbon, the Portuguese Riviera. It's called the Portuguese Riviera. It runs from Sintra or Cascais all the way to Lisbon.
It's where everyone surfs, It's where everyone surfs.
Yeah, people surf there. Usually they surf a little bit in what's called the Silver Coast. It's a little further north on that peninsula, in a place called Idealista, all the way up to Nazaré, where they have those giant waves. But there is a surfing culture even all across the Riviera up to the Silver Coast. And international buyers are now buying everywhere in the country.
I'm just curious to see if a similar pattern will then happen in Portugal. That happened here with property, because obviously property in the UK became disgustingly unaffordable 10 years ago, longer than that, 15 years ago. In sort of 2011, 2012, the average property went from similar 200 grand to like 400 grand in the space of 4 years. So it's like, I wonder if that's going to happen everywhere, blanket in Portugal. Like
I would say in Portugal, it's even more disgustingly unaffordable. Really? Because you need to understand, Portuguese median wage is 1,100 euros a month.
The disparity is bigger.
Disparity is enormous. I think it might be, at least in terms of rent to income, it is the highest in the developed world, the disparity.
So would you say that then maybe you have identified an opportunity in terms of helping that mid to lower bracket, which maybe doesn't get as much attention from local real estate companies because everyone is focusing on the 1%?
We do want to obviously try and help this crisis, and in a way we do, because obviously if we charge a fraction of the intermediation cost, we can reduce slightly the pressure. And so that's kind of an effect that we have. But the main thing that we're trying to do is to create some savings for sellers across all categories, even at higher end market. Because I think that things have changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. And like I said, the mindsets and the strategies, they've stayed the same in Portugal. Right now, to sell a house, there's one platform, it's called Idealista. It's also in Italy and in Spain and France. And it kind of, 70% of business happens through Idealista. You need to produce a nice listing with good pictures, good video, maximize the algorithm for Idealista. And essentially, if you do that, you'll have lots of leads and you'll probably sell the property.
Yeah.
There's some other things that you can do to improve. But basically, these are all things that you can do that you really don't need to pay 5% of your property value to have a good listing on Idealista and to produce some of the necessary things. And I think that's very different from obviously extremely high-end market where the agent role is very important because the network effects and what is even the property value. A house that's worth 2 million, it could be 2.5, it could be 1.5, and it all depends on what that one buyer is willing to pay. If you have an apartment at 400K in Lisbon in a building block that 3 other properties were sold last week, you know the prices. That's the price. It's going to be within a very small parameter. And so it's kind of ridiculous to pay 5% plus VAT, which by the way in Portugal is 23%. So you're really paying 6.2% on your property for an intermediation transaction that anybody really could do and that the sellers discover and they put their properties for sale with bad pictures. Usually they just do cell phone pictures, they put it for sale in Idealista and they're successful, although it's kind of a boring and difficult process. So we're kind of this intermediate solution that will take it from your hands, will handle the entire process from beginning to end. But instead of paying 5, you'll only pay 1.
That's really providing a solution to a massive problem. Now that we've explained it more,
I think it's providing, but not so much. I don't think we're kind of like heroes in the sense that we're going to really solve or even really dent too much the housing crisis.
It's a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's only so much one person can do at any given time.
So if you think about how you want to grow the company, what are the first roles you're going to be recruiting for? I mean, obviously, I would imagine that sales is the biggest bit. Yeah,
sales for sure, the most important aspect. Actually, it's the only thing that our business needs is to increase our listing volume. We're already doing quite well. This January, we did about 40 listings. Our target in the beginning of the year was to do 400 properties, and so we're ahead on that. I think now we're probably looking to get closer to 1,000 if we can for this year. Sales is everything. Right now we have 4 sales teams. We have a team in the north of Portugal, Porto, in the Porto area market. That's been very interesting. It's a market actually that's less saturated than Lisbon, and the properties sell faster. Their buyers are more, they move faster to buy any property across all segments. And we have 3 teams in the Lisbon area. Afonso leading one team, João Ferreira, which I mentioned, and Alexandra on the 3rd team. Alexandra focuses more on international clients.
Do you partner often with international real estate firms that can bring in some clients, and how do partnerships work for you?
We have 2 tiers to our model. We definitely partner with other agencies that have buyers, and what we explain to our seller clients, since they're only expecting to pay 1%, we explain to them from the beginning, 1% is if we find the leads, if we have the leads ourselves. So if they come through our funnel, if they come through Idealista, the ads, or any venue that we produce, it is possible that some agencies, whether they are international or even local agencies, will have a buyer for a property that they see. They'll reach out to us, and then we'll just be very pragmatic and direct. We'll inform the seller, look, there's a buyer coming from Sotheby's in New York or from a Remax in Spain. Are you willing to increase another 2% to pay them? They're expecting to get compensation. And the thing is, most sellers spontaneously, for a specific qualified buyer, they're willing to increase the commission. What agencies normally do is that they charge that 5% up front, and then they divide it if necessary. And they'll still make a lot of profit if they split it in half. But if they don't, that's just double the amount of money that they were looking for. So we kind of turn it opposite. We start with a foundation of 1%. This is what's necessary for us to have an interesting margin, but not ridiculous margin. And then we add on extra cost if it's necessary for a specific buyer.
Well, I have 2 crazy questions. Don't know if you have any. Is number 1, what's the proudest thing you feel you've done with Vendo so far? And then number 2, where would you like to see Vendo in a few years' time? What's What's your goal?
I think the proudest moment was this our Christmas party. Everyone was sick, so we had it
Oh,
this
no.
January.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It
That's
was
awful.
going around. So instead, we did it in January, and that was definitely the proudest moment. We had a table with I think it was 14 people.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
That's a
everyone
big
was-
team.
Yeah.
That's
That is
amazing.
a big team. That's lots of people to manage.
And everyone is in high spirits, good morale, and that's really for sure what I'm most proud of.
Definitely.
And then where do I want us to be? I think that obviously I think we can take this model and scale it in other jurisdictions. I don't think it works everywhere. I don't even conceive of applying it to the UK or to the United States. I think that the models are very different, even how real estate works. And I also don't have the know-how, and our team doesn't have the know-how. But places like Spain, for example, which has a market that is almost identical to Portugal in many of its dynamics, I think that it could definitely work. The other thing that we would also like to do, our website is starting to get some international traffic. So we're probably going to have some properties in Dubai and in Brazil, because
Cool.
we've actually been receiving people in Brazil wanting to sell their properties in São Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro. So we probably will, I would imagine that in 2 years, we'll be selling properties in Dubai, in Spain, in Portugal, and in Brazil.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.